Before I teach today, because we have a little bit of time, I want to share with you a little bit of a word of tochacha. Tochacha is generally considered like a critique that's done for the sake of heaven. Okay, offering a corrective that's done for the sake of heaven. Many people in this room, some of whom are here for the first time, will not have this apply to them. Not the part where I'm asking the behavior to be corrected, but many people in this room are struggling in this space, particularly in Pilch Hall, because of a particular behavior, and I want to point it out, not call it out, and then you're going to hear me speak about it sometimes at Daily Minyan also. So do I have your attention? I've offered a little spicy start. When we daven, when we pray in Ashkenazi settings, there is a significant amount of the tefillah from the Siddur where we start at the beginning of a page and we start a bit aloud together. Whoever is responsible for leading the prayer from the bima, that might be me, it might be someone else who's the shaliach tzibor or shlichat tzibor, leads from the bima, and they launch into it, and perhaps around the room, when they say, Ashrei yoshevei beitecha, you may hear some people in the congregation also go, Ashrei yoshevei beitecha, jalalucha sala, a sort of verbal but non-verbal acknowledgement that we're all starting. That rhythm is a rhythm of what we call peticha and chatima. Peticha is the start of the page. Chatima is whatever closes it. Sometimes that's a blessing, a bracha, a baruch atah, something. And sometimes it's just the end of a psalm. Everywhere in between there, the volume of prayer, going back all the way to the book of Samuel and the model of Hannah, as codified in the Mishnah, the Talmud, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch, everywhere else, the volume of tefillah should be a whisper that no one can hear except yourself. A whisper that no one can hear except for yourself. This is challenging in two ways. The more challenging thing, well, let's start with the less challenging thing. Lots of halacha, lots of halachot lead us to address a concern that we might accidentally be prizing some verses over others, either in the Torah or in the Siddur. So if I'm reading through the Siddur, and all of a sudden, as I read through Psalm 145, Ashrei, I go, as I'm sitting in my seat, Poteach et yadecha masmi alecho charatzon. I might accidentally, this is the psycho-spiritual issue, in case that's what motivates you. I think the other one should probably be the motivator, but in case that's what motivates you, it's challenging and problematic. Is that verse more important? Is that why you're lifting your voice? This is particularly an issue in Kriyat Shema, though I don't hear that come up very often. You know, we don't even stand for some parts and sit for others, lest we accidentally indicate that some parts are more important than others. The more challenging thing, and the thing that I want to bring to your attention in this room, is that people who are learning to pray personally in the context of services here are very challenged by the seeming shouting out of verses over and over again. Not only is that something that began, and since I've come here, I've noticed there are certain people who have verses, they've sometimes taken the time to come and tell me, this is why this verse means so much to me, and therefore I say it out loud. But it's become such a thing that other people who are regulars at the Minyan believe that they have to choose a prized verse of their own and start to say it out loud. This is explicitly forbidden in halakha, and it's explicitly forbidden for one reason and one reason alone: distracting your neighbor. The rabbis say that when you are praying, that you are absolutely allowed to pray fully out loud. So if you want to do Ashrei yoshvei beitecha od yalalucha sala ashrei hamishkacha lo, but there's only one place you can do that, and that's alone. And of course, we don't want people to be alone. And of course, reading through prayers can be particularly challenging. I hope that I'm being very specific when I say that the distraction and the matter of potentially elevating prayers one over another is simply a matter of the places when, let me frame it this way, almost everybody would agree and assume that it is a time for whispered prayer in the room. If you are making a choice other than whispered prayer, know that you're not just making that choice for yourself, you're making a choice for everyone else in the room. So when I begin Aleinu l'shabach, and I go quiet, that's an indication for everyone in this room not to daven any louder than that. Even if you love Shehu no teshamayim, it could also be that I'm making that decision for some important reasons in the room, like perhaps there's somebody who really needs to say Kaddish, and they also have an obligation to be somewhere else, like a Shiva home afterwards, and therefore we're moving things along. It's not willy-nilly. And I assume that when other people are leading, not just me, they have similar reasons. So what I'm asking you to do is, if you are one of the people who finds yourself occasionally, for the fun of it, because you love a verse, etc., being mindful and doing some tzimtzum, doing some pulling back of yourself in those moments. And I'm going to ask something even harder of the people who I would say, for lack of a better term, are not guilty of this. If your neighbor is doing this, think about a way that you might be able to share with them that this is challenging. There are times where people come to me as chazan and say, I'm trying so hard to learn to say the Aleinu myself regularly in services, but the person who sits next to me, and I love them as my seat neighbor, is saying the whole thing basically at a full voice. And that's really hard for me because it's totally distracting, okay? And I bet that that person, if they knew that they were distracting their neighbor, they would be able to pull back on that, at least sometimes. Sharing with somebody what you need in that space is important. So I hope that you'll understand that this is partially coming as somebody who is like a meta observer of this space. This is my responsibility, but I'm also amplifying the voices of several people who have come to me, not just recently, but over many years, to say that this is a very challenging custom. There are a lot of people in spaces like this tefillah on Shabbat afternoon, and especially in daily minyan, who are working so hard to feel like they can get the words of tefillah on the tongue. And if they're trying to whisper it and the people around them are choosing a louder volume, it's making it harder. Okay, thank you for letting me share that with you. This isn't the only time or the only space when I'm going to share it. I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I want to make sure that I share it in just the right way and just the right tones that I convey. It's a very serious matter, and it's a halachic prohibition, but it's also a matter of knowing that the people who are behaving in this way are doing so out of a real love for tefillah, and that's great. I love that you're here. I love that they're here. I love that that tefillah is familiar on your lips. Having a mindfulness of other people is even more important than that. So thank you for hearing me on that. Okay, Zehu, Siamti. Okay, I'm done, Dibarti, and now I'm going to move on to the sources. Okay, source work. And take it from, there we go, one. Please pass one. Okay, big one and pass. Okay. Now, of course, my friends who pray in Sephardi communities will tell me that there's another way to solve this, which is just to do absolutely every word out loud. If you go to the Aleppo synagogue, or if you go to anyone here go to a synagogue where that's the regular way of praying? No, nobody here does it? The last time I was in Israel, I went to the Aleppo synagogue, and not only is the whole of Shir HaShirim chanted before Kabbalat Shabbat, it's chanted kind of in unison entirely out loud by the whole community. That is powerful too. I can't say it was undistracting, but it was very cool. Okay, so we're gonna do some text study for Parshat Behar-Behukkotai. This really comes from the tail end of our joint parshas. And the teaching here is, Ve'achaltam yashan noshan, v'yashan mipnei chadash totziu. This is a prediction. This is a messianic vision gifted to us by the narrative voice of God about what it will be like when we are in a place of receiving divine reward. How will we be rewarded? Ve'achaltam yashan noshan, and you shall eat of the Yashan, meaning old stuff, typically old grain stuff. The noshan, that which is same root of the verse, made old through storage. It's old that is, I would call it aged. Does that make sense? Like aged cheese or aged wine, that's what noshan is, right? It's basically aged through time. The yashan, you're going to have to do something with this old stuff. Mipnei chadash will have to go mipnei before or in front of or out from before. The chadash, the new stuff, totziu. So you're going to have to pull out the old stuff before the new stuff. All right? You go shopping. Your fridge is full of stuff. You're going to have to clear some stuff to put new stuff in there. The purpose of this clearing is something that nobody agrees upon. There are so many varied meanings for why we would be told that we are either supposed to move the old out first, will have to move the old out first. It's just going to happen that the old stuff gets moved out first. Why would we want to move the old stuff out first? And almost none of the sources tell you it's because you should just move the old stuff out first. There's a reason behind each of these sources. We're going to look at Rashi first, who quotes the same source that he finds both in the Sifra, which is a very old set of Midrashim, and also in Bava Batra, which is from the Talmud about 1,500 years ago. We know that it was codified. And we're going to learn through Rashi what this idea, the answer to the question, why would you clear out the old stuff before the new stuff? The answer he finds is the following. Haperot yihiyu mishtamrin v'tovin lehityashen. Sheyehe yashan hanoshan shel shalosh shanim yafe le'echol mishel eshtakad. It's a prophecy or a promise that the perot, in this case, what kind of fruits? Not strawberry or watermelon, but grains, the same stuff we're talking about with the yashan and the noshan, that they will be perfectly not expired to keep for an entire year. And they'll even be so good, like the prophecy is your grain is going to grow at such a good quality that it's going to get old, and then the grain that grew old, even when it's on its third year of storage, not only is it going to be good, it's going to be better than the new stuff. So what's the reason, what's the why then for clearing out the old stuff to make room for the new?
So you can turn your old grain into challah or matzah or...
So you can use the old grain and turn it into the stuff that we use grain to turn stuff into. Yes, Irv.
Yeah, it's a storage issue. You know, like it says in the, today, best used by.
Sure.
First, I'm eating figs now for the next 2 months because I got something that was best used by like within 2 weeks. Because it's common sense, I'd rather eat that than have it be not go bad.
So Irv needs some recipes for like fig jam and fig popsicles and whatever. I've never had a fig popsicle. But I think it's not just a storage issue, meaning if it were just a storage issue, it would say you will be permitted to move the old stuff out, even if you have that which remains. Dates, lots of dates. They're all full up in your cover. Go ahead, you clear them out. What they're saying is that the new stuff as it ages will be of such quality that you can trust that you can get rid of the old stuff. What is a parallel in our text of having to trust that God will provide in terms of the choices we make with a harvest? We have an analogy, a different part of our text that teaches us that we should be okay to do a practice in which we don't actually, so I'm trying not to give it away, store everything because we can trust that God will provide. What's the? Oh, man is a great, I didn't even think of that one. Man is a great one. Irv also. Oh. Leaving a quarter of the field, right? You'll be fine if you leave the quarter of the field. Sure, is that, yeah? Bikurim and bringing of the fruits, also an example. This is a cousin of Bikurim. I'm thinking about our Shnat Shabbaton, our sabbatical year notion, right? Because you got to trust that you're going to be able to go that whole year without farming. And not only that year, but you won't have planted or sown anything. And therefore, what will you be able to reap in the next year? You've got to trust that the provisions will actually get you over the hurdle of that non-agricultural active year. Okay, so Rashi's reason is though ultimately very practical, right? A messianic promise, perhaps, that we're going to get plenty of good stuff, and the old stuff's even going to become better than, rather the new stuff's going to become better than the old stuff, and it's a practical matter ultimately. Sure, yeah, Diego.
I actually don't see it as like a matter of trust, because it doesn't say here that you don't throw out grain that has become bad throughout these years. I think it's actually a matter of culling. The stuff that you have stored for a long time is by definition the good stuff that you have.
Right, so maybe it is that the stuff that you've allowed to age and keep is actually the stuff of quality. Yeah, and seeing it that way. It's a matter of seeing it that way. That's absolutely possible. Yeah, it's a good read on it. Yeah, Bobby.
I'm also thinking of this from the perspective of generationally, whether it's Moshe, Joshua, or others, where we're allowing the next generation to age and mature like a fine scotch or wine, just like the generation prior to us did. So even though we're talking about a vegetable or a grain here,
Yeah.
This idea of making the seam of making room for something else or something else to become great.
Right, so one of the issues, if you read this as a parable about humanity, it would be telling you, don't worry, the people, the things that you see as being just the young ones, the new ones, they're fresh, you're right, they're really fresh, but they're going to be even better than the ones that we have now, right? And that idea of not feeling crazed when your doctor is younger than you. It's okay, they're better even than the old ones, right? So to say, the old generation, I mean, I'm not calling the generation old, but right, the previous generation, they're even better than them because they're coming along. It's a promise of olim bikdusha, this idea that will actually get better in quality as time goes on, and that's not often what we think of. Yeah.
And just to add on to that, when we talk about don't call your children your benai, but bonai, your builders. So that idea, which you're also referring to, or you're at least implying it, I feel like it also.
Right, lo bonaich ela bonaich, as in they're not just your kids. If you read it, the wink, wink, nod, nod, the right way, that they're actually the future and they're foundational. So, to see that as a promise of the future, and that's a great little parable to have in that. We're going to move on to a different meaning entirely. Turn the page and take a look at the next source. This is the next Rashi, just hooking on to the other part of the verse. The first Rashi was on the first part of the verse. Do you see that? This Rashi's on the next part of the verse. V'yashan mipnei chadash totziu. Sheyihu hagranot meleot chadash. V'ha'otzarot meleot yashan. Utzrichim atem lefanot ha'otzarot lemakom acher latet ha'chadash letochan. It's because the threshing floors, the place where the grain goes to be, the floor of the place where the grain is processed, they will be full of new grain. Meanwhile, the granaries are still full of old stuff. So you're going to have to clear out the granaries into this new place in order to place new fruit inside the primary threshing floor and granaries, because you need a dry place, because old fruit probably is done with its drying and can be brought out. In other words, when you have grain that needs to be processed, one of the reasons you would be able to move it out of the granary to make room for the new stuff is because it's a drying process, and the stuff that needed to dry out, the old stuff, it's fine to go and move it and store it somewhere. The way that I would put it is like, it's okay to move the clothing out of the dryer because it's dried, but the stuff from the washing machine, it really needs to go and get dried, right? All of it is clothing that's in the cycle of being cleaned, understood? But that stuff is already dry. You can go and put it in a basket and then ignore it and pretend and tell yourself that you're going to fold it for a few days. No, just me? Okay. You can move, yeah, that's the new place. That's our new hall. Like, oh, yeah, there, I'll take care of that later. Okay, but you can move it out of the dryer because the dryer is the place that's needed for the most freshly moist clothing. Okay, great. Understood my analogy? That makes sense? So you can go ahead and move it. Similarly, I'd say Irv even more practical than the first Rashi. He really is saying it's a matter of practicality. The old stuff done drying. Go ahead and move it out, and you can put in some new stuff to dry because it needs time to dry, and it needs the threshing floor to be presumably like late. I'm not great at understanding this, but I've studied enough Mishnah to, I think, understand that what we're talking about is rolling it out, spreading it out in order to do the proper drying process. We're going to move on to Bava Batra. Remember that Rashi, so this is confusing chronologically, but I want to explain it because I don't want to assume you understand. Rashi is a commentary from 11th to 13th centuries France. The Rashi that I read to you, the first Rashi, is taking commentary from the Sifra, which is it's BCE collection that, it's BC. It's a collection that we already have before the year 1, and also taking from Bava Batra, right? It was also from Bava Batra. Yeah, also from Bava Batra. And we're going to look at that Bava Batra source now, right? So Rashi himself is 11th and 13th century now, but I brought it because we're talking about him quoting a much earlier source. We're going to look more deeply into that source. So here's the Bava Batra that Rashi was looking at, the bottom of that second page. Got it? It begins with V'yasham mipnei chadash totziu, and the continuation of the verse in English. So, Milamed, this teaches, Shahayu otzarot milein yasham v'garnot milein chadash. V'hayu Yisrael omrein, Hayach notzi zeh mipnei zeh. Amar Rav Papa, kol milei atika, me'alya levar mitamre, v'shichra, v'harsana. Now, some of you are going to disagree with this teaching. You'll see why in a second. So, they had the same question that we had. Wait, hang on just a second. The Jewish people are going to ask, how is it that we're going to go and take out this old produce before the new produce is brought in? And Rav Papa said, meaning trust issues. How do we do it before we know that the new stuff has been brought in? You understand? He's saying, hang on. Is it okay to go ahead and eat down all the food, or go ahead and, right? It's a food insecurity. It's a huge food insecurity. How can we go ahead and clear that out and move it somewhere else? We don't know what's going to be harvested. Rav Papa says everything that's aged, it says old here, but everything that's aged is of a better quality to the new. Meaning you're going to want to eat that aged stuff. Like, you're not going to be so excited for the brand new, the freshly harvested stuff. Very exciting because it gives us hope that we're going to have food for the future. But that's not the good stuff. The good stuff is the aged food, he says, which is probably a part of the way that their food processing worked at that time. However, he says there are exceptions to this rule where the new is better than the old. And he says dates, liquor, and small fish. Who here likes new liquor better than aged liquor? That's what I thought. Okay, great. So moving on. We're not going to dive deep into that. There is a reason behind that, but I do not have time to get into it today. But we understand in summary that he says, don't you worry. The reason why you're clearing it out is because while it's important that we have a new harvest, ultimately it's the old stuff that we're excited to eat anyway. Okay? The Tiferet Shlomo, a much later commentary, comes along to teach something about this Ve'achaltem playing on Targum Onkelos. What is Targum Onkelos? Who knows what's a Targum when we talk about a Targum in the classical canonical sense? When we say a Targum, what do we mean? A translation of the Bible, often in Aramaic, sometimes in Greek, right? Did I get that right, Mark? Often in Aramaic and sometimes in Greek. And the translations themselves were considered to be not just any old translation, but actually Kodesh, like part of our canon. So everybody can translate. Everyone does translate in some way or another. These are accepted, canonized translations that in and of themselves, as we know, maybe you don't know this, every translation's a commentary. These are really commentary. They're very creative. And Targum Onkelos, which is written in Aramaic, says the following. Okay, we're gonna, for the sake of time, I have to move us to the English. So we learned that in Targum Onkelos, Atika de Atika. Targum Onkelos translates the word old grain as the Atik of the Atik, the ancient of the ancient. He compares it to this, apparently a Reshut, a piyut that he knows, that uses the word Atika Kadisha, okay, that the old is sacred. We're not going to get into that, but apparently that was a familiar song to this commentator. On Shabbat, the Shekhinah, the divine, comes down from the Atik. What is the Atik in this sense? God's dwelling presence comes down from the supernal world, okay? From the heavens, from the old world. What's the old world? The world that came before Bereshit bara Elokim. That's the old world. The old world is God's world, even though we don't know anything about it because we don't get an origin story in our Torah. That has to be Midrash. We don't know where God came from. But God came from the old country, right? That's the old country. So what's the old country? God's land, that's the divine dwelling places. So on Shabbat, where does God come from? There, in sort of a time-space, in sort of a time-space way, God comes down in from that old world, the Atik. And when Mashiach comes, not this guy whose name is Mashiach, when the Mashiach comes, all days will be on the level of Atik, meaning every day will be like Shabbat. So Mashiach comes, we are redeemed as a people. What is one of the descriptions of that redeemed world? The description is that we are living in a world in which God is basically all around all the time from the old world. And what do we call that except for Shabbat? That's Shabbos. That's Shabbat. The experience of Shabbat is having God coming and dwelling all the time, not just a once a week visit. Continues. That's what's meant by you will eat the old grain. This verse that we have in our Parsha. It refers to the rachamim of Hashem, the mercy of God that we have to bring to this world. You have to remove the old grain, meaning you have to remove the atik stuff and move it to be chadash, like mechadesh b'chol yom tuvo ma'aseh v'reshit. This idea that God renews the world every single day. We are similarly, according to this commentator, the Tiferet Shlomo, responsible for partnering with God in that mechadesh b'chol yom, that renewal every day, by pulling God from the Atik world and bringing it into our world. As if the divine is sort of like locked up in a closet, and it's our job to go take it out like fine china or linens. There it is. There's the old stuff. Or there's that 60-year-old bottle of whiskey, because aged whiskey is better than not aged whiskey. Got to learn more about Rav Papa. But it's like pulling that aged bottle off the shelf and saying, we're going to bring this in because it's going to make it so special. In this case, the Tiferet Shlomo sees that as actually the bringing of the divine into the world. You have to reach into the Atik and bring it into the Chadash. What's the Chadash? Our world, our existence nowadays. Our generation, exactly, Paige. This is all very nice. These are all very nice explanations. A practical explanation, an explanation that says that the old is going to be even better than the new stuff will be even better than the old once it ages, that the old stuff is the best stuff anyway, that we'll look forward to it, that this really isn't about grain at all, that it's about God, and it's about bringing God from the sort of divine realm into like bringing God into the everyday. Like when you come here on a Shabbat afternoon, you could be doing anything on a Saturday afternoon, you're here. And you're bringing God into the world by thinking about living with decency and in community and caring for people. That is a version of that. But I still like the next explanation better. There's a rabbi who writes for the past 2 decades as the Velveteen Rabbi, Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt. I love her Torah and the name of her blog. And she brings on this parsha and this particular verse a Zen parable. I was just talking to Rabbi Kligfeld about that this morning. He said he taught a version of this, just by coincidence, a version of the following parable in his IJS teaching, the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, last week. So here it goes. This is as told by Tom Dass, who is a writer on Buddhist practices. Nan-in, a Japanese master during the Meiji era, so that was roughly like the end of the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century, received in his presence a university professor who came to him to ask about Zen and living Zen Buddhism. Nan-in served tea. He poured his visitor's cup full, and then he kept on pouring. The professor, the university professor, watched the overflow. Right? He's sitting there watching the cup start to spill over until he could no longer restrain himself. It's over full. No more tea will go in, Nan-in. Like this cup, Nan-in said, you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup? What does it mean to take out the old to bring in the new? It takes some clearing out to make space for new practices. I want to name this in a practical sense and then in an ultimately just utterly spiritual sense. In a practical sense, if you are going to go and you're going to make a decision to raise the amount of time that you spend engaging with God, the divine, spirituality, doing tzedakah, bringing stuff to a neighbor, all of those things come with an opportunity cost. What I mean is, if you're doing that, you're not doing something else. You have to clear out and clear a schedule to make a choice to do good, to do right, to do Torah Lishma, to take care of yourselves, by the way. We're a little past that girl boss self-care era, but it's still important to think about. You need to make decisions and sacrifices and surrender a bit of that time where you would be doing something else such that there's time. Otherwise, what would you say every single time an opportunity arose to do good or interesting things? You would say, I'm busy, or in the spirit of this verse, my schedule is full. I didn't say that specifically, but I would be very proud of you, Irvin. You can come back and we'll all cheer you on for clearing out your closet. Maybe you'll find more dates in there. Okay. So in a practical sense, if you want to bring new good things into your life, into your schedule, into your cup of tea, you got to empty it first. You have to make space for it. In a completely spiritual sense, the following is true. Most new ways of thinking about the world make us uncomfortable because they conflict with the ways we already think about the world. What Zen Buddhists would teach, what Nan-in was teaching, is that it's impossible to truly begin to accept a new way of looking at the world until you release yourself from certainty that the only way to look at the world is the way you've been looking at it. If you are convinced that you're only open to yes and when it comes to philosophy or a way of living, there's no way to taste the new delicious tea that could be poured for you by all the teachers you encounter along the way. There just isn't. Because every time a new philosophy or idea comes along, it will register in your head and in your heart as bumping up against what you have as a foundational or fundamental belief. And you'll say, well, it's got to be nonsense, or I certainly can't go down that road because I don't believe it. It's a practice of releasing yourself from certitude and certainty. So what I wish with this Torah is that if it inspires you practically to clear out a closet, I'm very proud of you. But much more on point, I hope that this gives you an opportunity to notice in yourself when you are resistant to clearing out the old, either in a practical sense, because it's just hard to find time to do the things that you know would be good and you know you would love. Like giving up the other stuff in that space, clearing out the old is hard. Or when you find yourself saying, I can't even begin to consider this new idea or perspective on life because it bumps up so hard against the stuff that I believe so deeply. The first step in figuring out how to clear out the old to bring in the new is to notice those moments. And I hope that you find those moments, and perhaps we'll revisit once we get back to Elul, the hard work of figuring out what it means to actually clear out the old and bring in the new.